Hey, thanks for joining me today. My name is Matt Hansen. I've been doing process improvement work for 15, 20 years or so, and now I've been doing it for H&R Block for the last about 3 years, helping to develop a training and certification program using Lean and Six Sigma. So it's the kind of thing that's my passion that I love to do. So what I want to talk about today is about customer-centric metrics. Now I realize that you might think, I got this. I know what customer-centric metrics are. We do this. But what I actually want to show you is that the most common type of customer-centric metrics that most organizations use, without exception that I've seen, is usually got a lot of flaws or some risks or gaps that maybe we don't realize. So I want to explore that a little more and see if there's a better way that we can understand how the customer feels and what their expectations are so we can ensure we're measuring it in the right way. But before we get there, I'll tell you a story about Joe. When I used to work for a telecom company, Joe was an executive, and I remember having a meeting with him. We were talking about process improvement work. And we had on the board a whole bunch of these different metrics for call centers. Now, Joe was responsible for about 40 different call centers at this telecom organization. And there was 200 million phone calls, I think, that they supported every year, so huge, thousands of agents. So it was a big organization that he was managing. And he had on the board a whole bunch of these different metrics from a call center perspective. So is anyone familiar with call centers and some of their metrics? Cool. That's why I like to use this example too, because it tends to be something across many different companies and industries, because you all have customers and you want to hear from them. Or maybe if you're large enough, you also have your own internal call center for your employees that you want to hear from, or different areas like that. So in this case, for Joe, as the VP over this group, I asked him, so Joe, with all these metrics that are on the board, they're using it like a dashboard. I said, tell me which one, or maybe two, of these metrics do you think is your highest priority? What do you care about the most? What stands out to you? What keeps you up late at night if you're not hitting your key targets compared to some of the other ones? So what Joe started to do is, he went through the first one, and he explained the importance of the first one. Then he went to the second one, explained the importance of this. Now by the third or fourth one, I could tell where Joe was going on this. Every single metric, now there were dozens of them. We're talking about issue resolution, IR, customer satisfaction, CSAT, Net Promoter Score, NPS, first call resolution, FCR, CES is the the customer effort score, and also other metrics like average handle time, average speed of answer, ASA, lots of things I'm sure some of you are familiar with. He was going through every single one of those and treating those all as equally important. It's like, in my mind, I'm thinking, Joe, if they're all that important, then none are that important. Or he didn't seem, in my opinion, to have a strong grasp operationally in using these metrics. So I don't think he had a clear understanding of it. Well, nevertheless, Joe is no longer over that organization. But nevertheless, on that, what I want to use is that example where, how is Joe confident that he's looking at the right thing in his circumstance? How does he really know what the customer cares about, what the operation, whether it's effective or not? So that's what's really important. That's what I'm going to talk about today. So you might have heard this quote before: if you can measure it, if you can't measure it, you can't improve it. That's usually attributed to Lord Kelvin, or maybe it was Drucker that said it. If you look online, you'll actually see that Deming was the one who said it. There's so many variations, and even another variation of if what gets measured gets improved. There's so many variations. I can't tell who said it. For all I know, George Washington said it. But in this case, no matter what, from a quote perspective, is this really true? If you can't measure it, you can't improve it, implying that improvement only comes by measuring. Well, if I think about that, I've packed on a few pounds over the years. What if I wanted to lose some weight? Do I need a scale to know if I'm actually making improvement in losing weight? Probably not. I could just look at my pant size to see if they're getting bigger and bigger, so I'm getting smaller and smaller. Or I could look in the mirror, or maybe the opinion of other people. I could do a lot of other things to evaluate without stepping on a scale. But in some way, aren't those things still measurements? Aren't those things that I'm using still a measurement, but maybe an imperfect measurement? Not as precise as a scale. So maybe it's more worth it for me to invest in getting a scale so it can be more precise, so that way I can know that on a day after I had a big meal, did that affect me or not? Did it make a big difference? Or maybe I feel like I'm fit, I just exercised, so I feel like I'm losing weight, but the scale goes up a pound or two. I can be more precise with a good measurement rather than using these guesses, like using pant size or mirror interpretation. So in the same way, how do we know with our own metrics? Are we using a pant size kind of metric? Or do we have something that's much more specific, something that's precise that we can use to know, are we really making a difference or not? Now, I know we can get into the area of statistical analysis, but we're not talking about that. Can we be more specific in understanding what we're measuring and how we're making improvements and making a difference? So what I want to go over first is, I think it starts with understanding our customer. Now, I'm sure we've all heard the term of voice of the customer, VOC, so I'm not going to take that for granted. But from that perspective for VOC, what I would challenge is that for every single customer, you, me, wherever we go, or even the customers we serve in our organizations, every single customer, I believe, is asking the same exact question. That question is, am I getting the right thing at the right time for the right price? Am I getting the right thing at the right time for the right price? Now, what do I mean by that? Well, if we're getting the right thing, it's about the quality of what we're giving them. Is it meeting their expectation for quality or accuracy? For timeliness, naturally, are we giving it to them when they want it, when they're expecting it, or is it too late? And then for price, that's how they might assess value. Are they getting this quality, this timeliness, for the right price of what they're giving up to get it? Is it worth it to them? And that's how they assess the value for it. Now, this is, again, for you or for me, think about it in terms of, even if we just wanted to get a cheeseburger. I get a cheeseburger at McDonald's, or we can go to some of the higher-end steakhouse restaurants that charge $20 for a cheeseburger, like some of the restaurants here at the hotel. If you're going to see them, it's like $30 or $40 for a cheeseburger. Well, in the same way, it's just ground beef, or maybe there's something a little bit different, higher-end ground beef. But you got a bun and you got cheese and maybe some extra fixings. It's generally the same kind of thing. So what's the difference? Well, as a customer, when I'm going into McDonald's or I'm going into a high-end restaurant for this very expensive cheeseburger, my question I'm asking is going to be the same, but my expectations are going to be different. So if I'm going into McDonald's, I'm probably going to compromise my expectation for quality so I can get it faster. I'm also going to expect to pay a little bit less. That's how I assess value. If I'm going to a high-end steakhouse restaurant to get an expensive cheeseburger, I'm expecting to get better quality. I want it to meet my standard quality, and I also am willing to wait a little bit longer for it, and I'm willing to pay a little more for it too. Now imagine a steakhouse that says, you know, if we were trying to be more efficient here in our operations, if we could just get these people in and out a little bit faster, then we'll be able to increase our revenue. That sounds like a great thing. So how do we do that? Well, we're going to improve our timeliness for our customers. So let's instead cook these cheeseburgers in the microwave. We'll just do that and we'll get them out faster, right? And they will get them out faster. But they probably won't get them back because they're compromising quality at the same time. And that's the point. We've got to understand what are our customers expecting and how are we meeting that expectation. And understanding how we meet that expectation, I think that's more the operations or the voice of the process. What are we doing in order to meet that expectation for the voice of the customer? So in that way, I think that it's a similar question that every operation is asking. So I think it's aligned to the customer what they're asking. That is, as a company, am I doing the right thing at the right time, but in the right way? Am I doing the right thing at the right time, in the right way? So in other words, when I talk about doing the right thing, it's still about quality. Am I still meeting that expectation and quality defined by the customer and their question, what they're asking? Now for timeliness, am I doing it when they want it? Or am I doing it too late? Again, back to their expectation, what they're looking for. Now doing it the right way, it's indirectly related to price. Because if we can be more efficient at what we're doing, then that's where we can probably have some cost improvements, and we can pass on that improvement either into a lower price, or maybe we can improve the quality, or improve the timeliness without compromising the quality. We have more flexibility and options when we become more efficient, so that way we can ensure that we're still meeting the full expectation for what the customer wants. With that kind of question, I believe that that's what our customer-centric metrics are. Understanding that one question, how are we asking that question to understand what our customer really cares about? So that's what I consider to be the customer-centric metrics. So what if we're only good at 2 of those 3 areas of doing the right thing, right time, and the right way? Well, if we're really good at quality and timeliness, but we're kind of weak on efficiency and doing it the right way, well, again, we're probably going to be very expensive to operate, and we can't continue that for very long. If we're expensive to operate, we're going to either have to increase the price, which minimizes that value in the customer's eyes, or we're probably going to be tempted to compromise the quality or the timeliness of how we're delivering it to our customers. Something's got to give, is the point. Well, what if we're strong on quality and efficiency, but we're weak on timeliness? Well, what if our customer has a certain deadline that they have to get it by, or we're not meeting the commitment we made to them? It's kind of like the old cable thing of, yeah, we'll be there between this hour and this hour. If we don't show up, that's really bad. In the same way, for whatever we're doing for our customer, if we don't meet that commitment, that's bad. That's bad for our customer. And who knows what kind of cost they're incurring because we're not meeting the commitment we made to them. So timeliness is still very important. And then finally, what if we're good on the timeliness and efficiency, but we compromise the quality? Well, that's like the steakhouse example, where it's not worth it because the customer's just not going to come back. They'll have other options. They'll go somewhere else if we can't meet that expectation of accuracy and how they define quality. So really we have to be good on all three areas: quality, timeliness, and efficiency. The balance of those, again, in line with what the customer cares about. Making sense so far? All right, so back to Joe. Joe the VP, for some of you who might have walked in, Joe the VP who had a whole bunch of metrics and couldn't pick which one was most important. He had no clue. And this was probably a dozen or more metrics that we had listed on the wall on our dashboard. So with so many metrics like that for a call center, how do we align that to the same question of the quality or the timeliness or the efficiency of what we're delivering for a customer? Well, in the typical call center world, the quality is what's measured by survey data. That's the examples I gave about customer satisfaction, about IR, the issue resolution, or CES is the client or customer effort score of how much friction or effort it required the customer to get their issue resolved, or NPS, Net Promoter Score. A lot of these things I'm sure we've heard of to some degree in different ways. Well, these are surveys that usually call centers will use, and I'm sure some of you have taken them or given them when you've called into different places. Well, that's how they would assess quality for the most part. For timeliness and efficiency, generally that I've seen has been average handle time, because it's a way of understanding the total amount of calls, the total of time that was spent divided by the number of calls. So they get their average handle time. That's how most call centers that I've observed have operated. Is this different than what anyone else has seen? That's pretty much what I've seen too, and I've supported a lot of different call centers. So these are the common things. So again, for Joe's example, getting back to him, this is what he might use. So what I would challenge is, let's explore this a little bit further using this call center example to see how effective these perspectives are in these current measures. Because I think a way to evaluate that is using 3 steps. First step is, I think we need to select a type of customer we're dealing with. So we're trying to see, are these the right metrics that align to what the customer cares about, to that voice of the customer? Well, how do we do that? First step, first pick the customer. Now, depending on your organization, we'll have different types of customers. You can break it out by the demographic for the customer or the type of products or service that you're providing for them. Whatever it is, you know your business. Hopefully you know your customers well enough. You probably have multiple ways you serve your customers. So whatever way you might segment your customers, think about just one of those segments. Not all of your customers, but just one of them. I work at H&R Block, so we might have customers who go into the office to get their taxes done. We have some that do it online, or some that do a combination of both. Here I'm just saying just pick one type of customer and start there. Second step, what are the key outputs that you're delivering to that one type of customer? What is the product or service that they're looking for? Third step is try to follow a customer-centric matrix. Walk that perspective of who that customer is, what output you're delivering to them through this matrix to help evaluate, are these the right metrics? And is there a better way that really understands not that pant size example, but a better scale type of measurement for being more precise on what the customer cares about? So let's walk through the example using the call center metrics. So we go down the quality path first. First thing is, what does your customer want? They want an accurate solution for the reason they called, whatever that is. So that's a call type or call reason or something like that. Whatever the issue is, these are customers who are calling in not because they want to. Customers don't say, hey, let me just call that company. I just feel bored today. I got nothing else to do. They call because there's some pain, there's some reason they want to call to get something resolved to some degree. Good or bad, it's usually not very good. It's usually for some reason they're calling. They have to carve time out of their day, so it's important we understand why they're calling. So first, what is it that the customer wants? They want an accurate and a complete resolution for whatever that reason is they're calling about. So how do we currently measure it? Well, the example I gave before, typically it's survey data type of measures, that customer satisfaction, NPS score, that kind of thing, where we survey them to ask them, hey, did we resolve your call or not? So what are the gaps or risks associated with that kind of perspective? Believe it or not, from the analysis that I've done in the past, and I've done a lot of it, I've never seen, so I won't say it never exists, but I've never experienced and seen personally that the sample data represents the population. I've never seen that happen. What I mean by that is, if you're ever doing a survey, let's say I pulled aside who this customer segment was. And in that customer segment, I saw that, well, you know what, for this type of customer, it tends to be 60% male, 40% female. Just totally making that up. The point is, let's just say we knew that based off of our total population of customers that fit that demographic. If for whatever reason, if gender matters for that, then if we looked at the sample data, does our sample data represent that 60-40 distribution? Most of the time, the examples that I've seen like that might be a 60% male, or I'm sorry, 60% female and 40% male, or some inverse or something very different. Now that may not be good or bad, we're not really sure. The point is, if it's not representing the population, then there's a gap there. There's some risk. And if any of you have done statistical analysis, you might know that if you don't have a good unbiased representation in your sample that represents the population, can you really trust it? It's like the minority folks are speaking on behalf of the majority of those who happen to be calling. And that may not be truly represented. Do we really want to fix something just because somebody is loud and communicating it in a survey when maybe they only represent a small exception? Do we want to fix it for everybody because of that? Probably not. So let's get a fair representation. So it's a big risk with a lot of survey data. If you ever do survey data like that, I would challenge you, if you haven't done it yet, make sure your sample data represents the population, at least proportionally like that. Another example is customers often make mistakes. Customers not always right. I'm sure some of you can agree with that. So when a customer, I've seen this example when I worked at this telecom company before. When we looked at their call center metrics, the customer, we asked them, is this the first time you called about this issue? Yes, it's the first time we called. And yet we go back and we see their call behavior and see that they actually called in that same day or multiple times in the prior few days or weeks or months. It wasn't their first call. Or we've seen the opposite, where they say, this is not my first time I'm calling it. We have no history of them calling before that. So again, customers are just not always accurate, or they might have misinterpreted numbers. I don't know if any of you have seen some of the survey data where somebody gives you an extreme negative response on something simply because they didn't understand how to interpret the survey. If you had your scale as a 1 to 5, hypothetically, 1 being low, 5 being high, they might have inversed it. And if you have verbatims that are from the survey where they actually gave some explanation verbally about the experience that they had, you might see, well, they rated us really low here, but the comments they gave were great. What's the conflict here? It's usually because they misunderstood how to interpret the survey. So they just make mistakes, and yet it's hard for us to evaluate comments and text, so it makes it really difficult. In that way, it's just sometimes unreliable. So there's a big risk. So what I would propose instead is a better way to measure it, use behavior. Actually go back to the behavior for those customers who are calling in. So instead of basing on a survey, hey, did we resolve your issue? Instead, look and see, did they call back again for the same exact issue? If they called back the next day or within a few hours about the same exact issue, we probably didn't resolve it the first time. Why do I need a survey to figure that out? I can figure that out just on the behavior for them. So we can do things like that. Or look at your sales. If we see that customer suddenly cancel their account or no longer purchasing from us, if we track it that way, that's also a good sign that maybe what triggered that, it could have been back to that call, and maybe the issue, whatever it was resolved. In other words, let's look for ways where we can measure that in a behavior standpoint, not just on their opinion using a survey, simply because we can avoid those risks associated with surveys. So let's try the next one for timeliness perspective. What happened there? Timeliness, what does a customer want when they get their issue resolved in a reasonable amount of time? Customers don't always want it to be fast. They just want it to be right. So it's not about just hurrying to get off the phone in this example. They just want to get it done right. So customers sometimes is willing to wait a little bit longer to ensure that they're getting the right thing done for them. So in that case, how do we measure it? Well, it's usually by AHT, the average handle time or average speed of answer, how quickly they're answering the call while they're waiting after they're on the IVR system before an agent actually pops on. Sometimes they measure it that way. But what are the limitations and gaps with that perspective? Well, it's ignoring that repeat call activity. So from a handle time perspective, usually, when I've seen in call centers, they want to get that handle time down as low as possible. So they try to beat on the agents, get off the phone, hurry, get it faster. And agents are really smart, and they're good. If you are going to hold me accountable to get my call done faster, I'll do that. Hey, thanks for calling our company. Have a nice day. They'll do it if they need to, or they'll transfer it to somebody else. They figure it out. They're smart. But another perspective that may not be considered is that if a customer calls in today, let's say it's 500 seconds for this one phone call. If the customer didn't get their issue resolved and are calling back again tomorrow for the same issue, and it's another 500 seconds. Average handle time is 500 seconds. 2 calls, they're each 500 seconds. That's the average handle time. What did the customer experience? 1,000 seconds. That's pretty painful. But we don't see that in the average handle time. Wouldn't it be better if we instead stay a little bit longer on that first call, maybe 800 seconds or whatever it takes to get the issue resolved so the customer doesn't have to call back? What's it going to do to average handle time? It's going to make it look worse. It's going to increase it. Is that a bad thing? Heck no, because the overall system is recording 800 seconds instead of 1,000 seconds. The customer is not experiencing 1,000 seconds. It's not just 1,000 seconds. The pain, again, of a customer interrupting their day to have to call back again, you don't know what frustration they went through to have to make that repeat call. So it's not just literal 1,000 seconds they're experiencing, it's almost more compounded, but we just don't have another measurement for that. The point is, can we get back to behavior? Is there a better way where we can measure a total handle time? The total handle time down to the customer level. The total handle time across the whole system, so we can see exactly how much each person is experiencing when they have to interact with us. Last perspective for efficiency. What is it that we want from a call center management perspective? What they want to do is they want to complete more calls in a more efficient manner. So they want to get these calls out as fast as possible. And the way they usually measure that is using those same time and volume types of metrics like AHT. Well, in the same way, if they're using those same metrics, it's going to reveal the same kind of results. It's going to be the same thing. So instead, again, let's look at the total handle time across the whole system. If I see 1,000 seconds for the whole day, and now I can see that that total number of seconds, regardless of the number of calls, regardless of my handle time, the average handle time, if I see my total number of seconds declining, that's a good thing. Even if it means more volume, that's okay. Or if it's less volume and my AHT looks higher, that's okay because you're reducing the overall amount of seconds in the whole system. So I recognize that this is not something everyone's familiar with for call centers, but the point is here, something that is very common across many industries and companies are call centers. These are very standard metrics. If you go to any senior executive or anyone that's over these, they'll rely on these types of metrics. And my challenge is, are these the right metrics? I propose they're not. Or let's look for another way to do it instead of relying on just these. And the problem too is that it's work. We don't measure it this way. Our systems don't record it this way, so we'll use what we can. Well, that's like using that pant size example for trying to determine if I'm losing weight. Maybe it's worth the investment to get something that's more precise. Put a little more work into it because that's going to get me a lot more clarity to know what the customer really cares about. Am I really solving it for them? So, some characteristics. If we have to build a metric like that, if it becomes difficult, how are we going to do that? Well, in order to do that, if you're going to create one, here's some characteristics you want to consider as part of that process. If you're creating a new metric, I would recommend that it be a metric that is synced in some way to the process, closely tied to what that process is and how it's running. It should be normalized by dollars or units, like an example of call centers, it'd be down to the call level or something normalized so that you don't have false positives or false negatives in your interpretation of the metric. It should be numerical, because you can do a lot more statistical analysis using numerical data, not subjective kind of discrete type of data. It should be unbiased and something very reliable too. And also it should be aligned to your financials where you can tie revenue and cost to it to some degree. As well as the efficiency side should be tied to the quality and timeliness. Back to the example of the steakhouse, why would I want to improve my efficiency if I'm going to compromise my quality? Is there a way we can have our metrics somehow account for both, or balance the quality, the timeliness, and the efficiency together? If you can, great. If you can't, you might need to do a combination of it. It may not be one perfect metric. I'm not saying come up with one. The point is, let's challenge ourselves to find what is the ideal metric. Let's not just rely on the rote method of how we've always done this, but let's really think differently to make sure we're not creating more risks. And let's see if we can mitigate the risk to get a better metric instead. In creating other metrics too, some core metrics or some core characteristics for metrics would include things that are based on survey data. Already talked about that. Data that's monitored or tracked by people. So if it requires a person to manually listen to a phone call, like you might have experienced people who are auditing a call, and they listen for key characteristics, like one organization that I was part of when they were looking at call center metrics, they were listening to the call to see if the agent on the phone was actively listening to the customer. What in the world does that mean? How do you say yes or no, they're actively listening or not? They're only partially active. How do you know that from audio? You don't know that. There are other things like that. There's 50 different metrics just on the person observing it. And the point is that if you have a person who's manually tracking this, it's prone to a lot of risks and problems, and your data might be unreliable. I'm not saying maybe that's all you can do, but the point is just be aware there are risks associated with that if you're going to use that method. Also, if you're using a wrong level of averages, if you're using it at a too high or too low of a level, or you're not accounting for how averages really should only be used when you're using a normal distribution. So if any of you like me geek out over some of the statistical side of things, if you ever have any measurement of time, it almost will never be a normal distribution. Like the average handle time example, or anything that's measuring or tracking time will almost never be normally distributed because you usually can't have negative time. If you can't have negative time, you can't go below zero, it's going to be a non-normal distribution. And that's okay, but just be aware that means you can't use average as your measure for central tendency. You should use another one like a median. So a median handle time would probably be better than average handle time. Am I the only one geeking out over that kind of thing? I love that kind of stuff, but I know wherever at my work, when I try to teach that thing, the eyes just glaze over. What in the world is he talking about? I'm not a mean person. What are you talking about mean? Anyway, so the point is that be aware of these risks just generally associated with metrics. Don't just try to come up with something quick, test it. Run it by other people who are smarter than you, other groups who are more familiar with it, just to make sure that you're measuring it the right way and you can trust it. Last thing I want to cover is that what do we do with all these other metrics? Hey, Joe, you told me about all these different metrics you had on the wall that you care about. So, which ones are really most important? What do we do with all these other ones? We just throw them away? Well, in Joe's perspective, you might feel like he's in the cockpit of an airplane. I'm not a pilot at all, but if you ever see a cockpit, it looks like so many dials. What in the world do I do here? And that's not even counting looking outside and how you're going to fly. So there's so much to look at, it can be so distracting. So instead, we should model it like a dashboard for a car. We have a primary metric right in front, put it up front, hide the other ones. So in other words, if you know what your key metrics are for the customer, make those prominent. Make them a top priority. Make them visible. Let it be something you measure on a constant basis. What do you do with all the other metrics? Well, maybe you can have a trigger for those, so that they're alerting when there is an issue. So if it becomes a problem, define the target for those things so that it will trigger, like a check engine light. Let it just alert you when there is an issue and you need to go take action on it. You resolve it, then it just goes away, and you continue to stay focused on your primary metrics. The point is, keep your primary metrics the primary thing. All back to relating to what the customer cares about. So from an operational standpoint, that means, again, we want to operate ourselves where we're doing the right thing at the right time in the right way for our customers to hopefully meet their expectations. That's all I had. I'd be glad to entertain any questions or comments anyone has on this. Yes, sir. Sure.
It's hard to believe, but not everybody thinks you should have metrics. I know, it's a shocker, right? So when you're working with leadership, and these are the people you really have to convince, like, do you have a method, or whether it's soft or hard, data-based or not, how do you go about first convincing them they need metrics, and then second, helping them to kind of lead them along to build their own metrics? Does that make sense?
Yeah, and it's not always easy,
No.
Especially if you're talking to an executive leader. Thank you. So I'm guessing you had a really good voice. Did anyone not hear the question? Nice and loud, thank you. Louder than me. So it's always a struggle from an executive standpoint. So what I usually like to do is put the ball in their court, make them defend what they're doing. So I would ask them, how are you measuring this? What are you doing? How do you know that's right? And I try to think about, anticipate risks or conflicts with it, just knowing some of the things statistically that can come about with data and how it's measured. So I might just say, well, how do you know when this type of thing occurs? How do you know this is reliable for your source and where you're getting this? And I'll usually put the question back on them, so then they're like, I'm not really sure. It's because my manager told me that, who reports to me. And then so the point to me, I guess, is rather than me telling them, I want them to discover for themselves the gap in their own metrics. And then try to offer, well, let's test it out. Let's work together to see if this is right. Because you might have a great metric already, but let's just validate it. Because if we do validate it, doesn't that give you more confidence in that metric? If there are risks that we uncover, isn't that still a good thing to know? So now you can account for those risks and hopefully find other ways to mitigate it. Does that help answer that?
Absolutely, yeah.
Cool. Great question. Yes, sir.
Matt mentioned about the metrics on call quality evaluation. That I know you may not be the right metric, but how do you judge otherwise the quality of the interaction with clients if you don't do it?
Well, at least when I've worked in the call center world before, we have the recorded calls to hear what's happening, to understand that behavior. But there are lots of great tools now from, if you have high volume, 200 million calls, that in that example where I was working before. So you might have voice analytics as a tool that's used that tries to assess the reasons for or issues for the call by interpreting the audio and interpreting it into text. And it's sometimes the voice analytics that I've seen are good at detecting tone and inflections as well. So you can kind of tell if there's an escalation in volume. So that's not a great answer, but when you're dealing with millions of calls, that's a great way to at least help you know where to look as a possibility. But nothing beats at least talking to a customer directly. Or even some examples I've seen is where if a customer has repeat calls, we see that there's a lot of pain, or we know that they're a high value in the sense of they spend a lot of money with us and we want to keep, or they've got a lot of history with us, then we might want to go to them directly and reach out and talk to them. Just ask them. To me, that's the best way to really know. But you still run the risk. That's kind of like a survey. It's one opinion. And so getting those insights can help guide us in other methods. But with that, I'm just cautioning, we've got to be careful when it's an opinion. Or when it's a few samples of a survey that where we're confident that that's correctly affecting the rest of clients. We don't want them to speak too much on others. Does that kind of answer your question? Because I don't want to, I know it's not easy to go, you can't go to everybody, and that no customer would want to have a call from every single person. But the best example I've seen is when you just listen to the recorded calls and try to work with it that way.
I think I really love your presentation. I run the contact center for Proqis, so it's quite close to me when I was hearing some of your metrics and thoughts around it.
Oh, cool.
And something that is actually being done in the industry, and there's a lot of people in APS and on PhD and so on. And I think I agree with you, this always not give the right indication. So looking at the right kind of data is very important.
Yeah, and this isn't popular because executives won't want to hear about, well, NPS, that's the new flavor. We want to use that. Or CES was one of the later ones that came out. But it is, yeah. Well, executives, you have to dumb it down to them so they can interpret it, right? Make it easier. No, but there are risks. Just being aware of those, that's half the battle. But they're going to do what they want to do. But to me, I just feel like we got to make them aware when these risks occur.
We actually started using repeat call metrics just 2 months back, and I've started seeing the results. We're able to manage the client experience much better by mounting repeat calls.
Oh yeah, yeah.
On a daily basis, customers who repeat the repeat call without the wait and so on. That's really helping. And my question is, when you say the data of repeat call measurement and looking at the HC total handling time instead of HC, would that be the same day, or you're looking at 2 to 3 days of time?
Well, that's where the operations are going to have to detect that, what your volume is. I think it's worth getting down to like at a daily level, weekly level, and monthly. Monthly, I'd be cautious because every month is different as far as the number of days. But I love using weekly because every week has 7 days. It doesn't fluctuate like a month that has 29, 30, or 31 days. So when you compare month to month, you got to account for how you'll have naturally higher volume because you just have more days. Or you might have more Mondays, which is a high call volume day. There might be 5 Mondays in a given month compared to the next month. So I don't usually trust month to month, but week to week is usually a better indication, I think, at a minimum that you'd want to look at it.
Just the customer may have called for a different query, right?
But I'm sorry, by the way, I don't want to keep anybody. I'm more than happy to stick around and answer questions, but don't forget the survey they asked me to remind everyone to. Thank you for your time.
Thank you so much.
Well, I'd be glad to still talk and answer some questions.